The second the door clicked shut behind me, an unsettling mix of dread and disbelief sank into my chest, pressing down like a weight I couldn't lift. My friends had been grinning all evening, teasing, making the bet sound harmless, casual, like a joke that would disappear by morning. But now, standing alone in the bathroom, holding the pile of clothes that would redefine the way I saw myself, I realized just how sharp the edge of their laughter could be. It wasn't just a dress. It wasn't just stockings or heels. It was a challenge, a mirror held up to my insecurities, my pride, and my unspoken curiosity, all wrapped in satin and lace. I stared at the dress, a delicate red velvet number trimmed with fur and tiny sparkling beads, and my fingers shook as they traced the seams. The fabric was soft, almost alive, and the way it slipped through my fingers made a quiet, insistent whisper in my mind, "This is who you could be, if you let it." And then the panic hit, a rush of heat across my face, my heart hammering like it wanted to escape my ribs. What was I even doing? How had a simple Christmas bet become a reckoning with something I didn't even understand about myself? My hands moved before my mind could catch up, clumsy, hesitant, tugging on the stockings first, feeling them stretch over my calves, the tightness sending shivers up my legs. Each tug made me more aware of the contours beneath the fabric, and a strange tension mixed with my embarrassment, an unfamiliar awareness that made my pulse skip. I was laughing nervously at myself, muttering half-hearted jokes, but the sound of my own voice startled me, fragile and uncertain. When I slid into the dress, the soft velvet clinging to my torso, my fingers trembled against the zipper at the back. It was snug, intimate in a way I wasn't prepared for, yet there was a peculiar thrill in feeling it mold itself to me. Then came the heels. I had seen women walk in them 1,000 times, always thinking it looked effortless, graceful. Now, as I planted my feet, the first step was a revelation of imbalance and tiny panic. My legs wobbled, my toes cramped, and yet, somehow, with each careful step, a strange confidence began to bloom. The reflection in the mirror shifted with every motion, every hesitant sway, and the person staring back at me was both foreign and intimately familiar. It was me, but not the me who had gone to bed last night. It was a version of me that seemed daring, delicate, impossible, and somehow inevitable. My hair, extensions that shimmered like liquid chocolate, fell over my shoulders, brushing against my collarbones. My fingers traced the strands almost reverently, feeling the weight and texture, trying to reconcile this image with the version of myself I'd carried through every casual, guarded day of my life. There was a strange thrill in the transformation, but also an ache, a flicker of fear that someone could see me like this and never take me seriously again. And yet, beneath that fear, an unexpected warmth bloomed, a sense of discovery, of stepping into something forbidden and beautiful at once. Outside, the muffled laughter of my friends vibrated through the walls. Their voices were sharp, teasing, yet somewhere beneath the mockery there was anticipation, a silent acknowledgement that something important was happening in that small, humid bathroom. My breath hitched as I ran my hands over the dress again, over the contours of my body I had always taken for granted. How had a simple bet led me here, to this strange, intoxicating threshold between shame and exhilaration? I straightened my back, adjusting the hem of the dress, testing the sway as I shifted from one foot to the other. The mirror didn't just reflect a costume, it reflected possibility. Every curve, every delicate line of lace, every smooth, unfamiliar angle of my face framed in the cascade of hair whispered a question I wasn't ready to answer. Who am I, really, when no one else is looking? The heels clicked softly against the tile as I took a few tentative steps, and with each one, my heart pounded with a mixture of terror, wonder, and an unnameable desire to see how far this path could take me. And just like that, standing in a room I thought I knew, surrounded by laughter I thought I understood, I realized the bet had been lost a long time ago, not in the game but in the moment I hesitated, the moment I felt curiosity stir where only caution had lived before. Something fragile, something thrilling, something entirely new was taking root inside me. and there was no turning back. The living room was brighter than I expected, glittering lights casting warm halos over every surface, the tree glowing like it held some secret only I hadn't yet learned. My friends were lounging with their mugs of cocoa, eyes glittering with amusement and expectation. Every step I took felt amplified, the click of my heels echoing in my ears, like a drumbeat marking the passage into some new, impossible world. I could feel their gazes before I even reached the center of the room, and the weight of their attention made my chest tighten. I wanted to laugh, to tell them this was ridiculous, that it was just a bet, but the words caught in my throat. Wow. One of them breathed, and it wasn't just a word. It was an examination, a quiet evaluation that made my stomach twist. Their tone was playful, teasing, but beneath it, I thought I heard something else, a subtle acknowledgement that this version of me wasn't entirely fake. My fingers nervously twisted the edge of the dress, the soft velvet slipping between my trembling hands, and for a moment I wished I could disappear, wished the ground would open up and swallow me whole. And yet, with every heartbeat, a strange defiance bloomed alongside the embarrassment. I was here, utterly exposed, and I couldn't look away from my reflection in their eyes. They laughed, a gentle, almost conspiratorial sound, and suddenly the room didn't feel quite so hostile. Their amusement was still there, yes, but it was accompanied by something unexpected. Curiosity, fascination, the kind of attention that didn't humiliate but confirmed my presence in a way I had never experienced before. I tried to mimic their relaxed posture, shifting my weight from heel to heel, but every movement reminded me of how strange and unfamiliar this body felt, how each sway and tilt of the hips carried 1,000 tiny shocks. My own shadow seemed different on the floor, elongated and exaggerated by the fairy lights, and I realized I was noticing every detail, my fingers, my shoulders, the line of my neck, and the awareness was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. One of them stepped closer, grinning, their voice low and teasing. "You look incredible. I didn't think you'd actually pull it off." And I blinked, startled, because it wasn't a critique, not exactly. There was admiration there, but not the kind I expected, and it sent a ripple of heat across my face. I wanted to speak, to make a joke, to deflect the intensity of that gaze, but the words refused to come. I realized then that I wasn't pretending anymore, not really. Each glance, each carefully measured step, each brush of my hair across my shoulder, made me more aware of this new self, this fragile, trembling persona that existed only because I had dared to lose a bet. I sank onto the couch, heels clicking softly against the floor, and felt the fabric of the dress shift against me. The velvet was soft but insistent, reminding me that there was no going back, not just from the outfit, but from the self-awareness it demanded. My friends chattered around me, their words blurring into a background hum as my thoughts spiraled. Who was I in this moment? Who had I become, and how much of me had been hidden until now, waiting for a spark, a dare, a ridiculous bet to ignite it? The more I tried to act casual, the more impossible it felt. Every laugh, every sideways glance, every sip of cocoa I took seemed magnified, observed, dissected. My mind flitted between panic and exhilaration, shame and awe. I caught myself touching my hair absent-mindedly, smoothing a strand that had escaped, and realized the gesture wasn't entirely automatic. It was deliberate, a silent assertion that I belonged here, even if I didn't know why. My heartbeat thrummed in my ears, and I felt a strange pride mingled with embarrassment. Pride in what I didn't yet know. Pride in the audacity of stepping forward. Pride in discovering that I could inhabit this version of myself without collapsing. And then came the moment I hadn't anticipated. A genuine smile, not teasing, not ironic, but soft, warm, and full of recognition. It passed between us silently, almost imperceptibly, yet it shattered something inside me. I realized I had been terrified of judgment, of ridicule, of being caught in this strange, feminine guise. But now, the recognition in their eyes suggested acceptance, not mockery, and for the first time, a trembling hope stirred within me. Could it be that this experiment, this bet, this forced transformation, wasn't a trap? Could it be that I had stumbled into something I had never dared to name, something that felt startlingly like freedom? I shifted again, the dress hugging me with every subtle motion, and I felt a growing warmth, not just from the heat of the room or the soft glow of the lights, but from the realization that perhaps this self, fragile and trembling though it was, had been waiting for permission to exist all along. Every movement, every glance, every heartbeat seemed to affirm it, and a strange, dizzying mixture of fear and exhilaration washed over me. And yet, even in that moment of tentative acceptance, a quiet, insistent anxiety lingered at the edges of my consciousness. What would happen when the laughter faded, when the lights dimmed, when I returned to the life I had known, the clothes I had worn before, the self I had always thought was immutable? Could I carry even a fragment of this awareness forward, or would it dissolve, leaving me haunted by the memory of what I had glimpsed in that mirror, in that dress, in that moment of fragile vulnerability? I closed my eyes briefly, letting the soft hum of the room fill me, the smell of cocoa and pine, the warm laughter around me, and a single thought crystallized, strange and undeniable. Something inside me had shifted irrevocably, and no bet, no teasing, no social expectation could undo it. The question was no longer whether I could return to the person I had been. The question was how I could live with the person I was discovering, and how long it would take before I allowed myself to truly meet her, face to face, in the mirror, in the world, in my own heart. Every glance in the mirror felt like a confrontation. I couldn't look away, yet I feared what I might see if I stared too long. The dress clung to me in ways that made my own body feel simultaneously familiar and alien, every curve highlighted, every line accentuated, every movement a reminder that I was no longer merely myself, not in the way I had always understood that word. The laughter from earlier had faded into a background hum, leaving me with the quiet, insistent pulse of my own thoughts and the low, steady thrum of anticipation in my chest. I wasn't just wearing a dress. I was inhabiting a persona, a version of myself that had always existed somewhere beneath the surface, waiting for the chance to emerge. I traced the hem of the dress absent-mindedly, feeling the velvet against my fingertips, and realized I was noticing details I had never allowed myself to see before. The soft curve of my shoulders, the delicate taper of my wrists, the subtle sway of my hips when I moved. It was as if I were seeing my body for the first time, truly seeing it, not as a collection of familiar shapes and habits, but as something capable of expressing, of communicating, of existing in ways I had never imagined. The sensation was intoxicating, but it came with a sharp edge of fear. What if this wasn't me? What if this was just a fleeting, fragile illusion conjured by a bet, by clothing, by the laughter of friends who would never take it seriously? And yet, when I moved, the dress shifted with me, soft and pliant, embracing every inch of me as though it recognized something I had refused to acknowledge in myself. My hair fell across my shoulders like a curtain, and I caught myself playing with the strands, twisting them around my fingers, marveling at their weight, their texture, the way they framed my face. The reflection in the mirror startled me. It wasn't the reflection I expected. This wasn't a costume or a joke. It was a person who could exist, who could breathe, who could move through the world with a presence I had never known I could command. My friend's teasing had faded into whispers now, occasional comments that made me laugh nervously or shift uncomfortably in my heels. Every interaction was a lesson, every glance a test. I could feel the tension in my body, the simultaneous pull of self-consciousness and exhilaration. Sitting on the couch, I crossed my legs carefully, noticing how the dress fell naturally over my thighs, the subtle sway of the velvet reminding me that every motion, no matter how small, was a declaration. I was performing, yes, but I was also discovering, inhabiting, and perhaps even becoming. The fear came in waves. Each time someone looked at me, smiled at me, or laughed with me, a part of me wanted to run, to shed the dress and retreat into familiar comfort. But another, stronger part, one I hadn't fully recognized before, thrived in the attention, the subtle thrill of being seen in this way, the vulnerability turned into power. It was dizzying, confusing, and beautiful all at once. I realized then that I was learning something profound about myself, that identity was fluid, that expression could be playful and transformative, and that courage sometimes came wrapped in silk and lace, in high heels and flowing hair, in moments of awkwardness that demanded both humility and audacity. I stood again, testing my balance on the heels, taking careful steps across the living room, each one a negotiation between fear and confidence. The mirrors reflected me in fragments, my shadows stretching along the walls, my hair catching the light, my fingers brushing the velvet at my waist, and I felt both invisible and intensely visible at the same time. The sensation was intoxicating, like walking a tightrope between who I had been and who I was discovering I could be. Every breath, every heartbeat, every small adjustment of posture was a negotiation with myself, a careful measurement of how far I could push, how much of this self I could reveal, and whether I would allow it to exist beyond this room. And then the first real challenge appeared. My own voice. Speaking was harder than walking, harder than standing, harder than looking at myself. When I laughed at a joke, my voice sounded higher, softer, and I winced at the unfamiliar tone. I caught myself trying to lower it, to force it into the comfort of normalcy, but each attempt felt artificial, constrained, and deeply unsatisfying. I realized that this was the true test, not the dress, not the heels, not the attention of friends, but the act of allowing my expression, my voice, my presence, to match the image in the mirror, to be heard as this version of myself, and to believe that it was valid, real, deserving. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. Minutes felt like hours as I experimented with gestures, with posture, with speech, feeling every tremor of uncertainty and every spark of exhilaration. I noticed the smallest details, the sway of my hips, the curve of my collarbone, the way the velvet clung when I leaned forward, and each one carried emotional weight I hadn't anticipated. I was learning that identity wasn't just a reflection or a costume. It was a living, breathing construct that I could mold, shape, and inhabit, even if only incrementally, with courage and care. By the time the evening was halfway over, exhaustion mingled with exhilaration in my limbs. My muscles ached from the unfamiliar movements, my feet throbbed from the heels, and yet there was a strange lightness in my chest, a quiet affirmation that this was more than a fleeting adventure. The reflection in the mirror, the feeling of silk against skin, the soft rustle of hair across my shoulders, all of it whispered a truth I could no longer ignore. This self, fragile and tentative though she might be, had always existed, waiting for a chance to step forward. And then, in a quiet, unguarded moment, I caught my own gaze, and something remarkable happened. There was no judgment, no shame, no question, just recognition. I was seeing myself fully, not as a joke or a punishment, not as a bet lost, but as a person with her own presence, her own voice, her own power. The fear remained, yes, lurking at the edges, but it had softened, overshadowed by wonder, curiosity, and a strange, thrilling pride. I realized that I hadn't just worn the dress. I had inhabited it, transformed through it, and emerged on the other side with a glimpse of something irreversibly, undeniably mine. The room felt warmer, brighter, and somehow more intimate after that. Laughter and conversation flowed around me, but I was no longer entirely on the outside. I could move, speak, and exist in this space without apology or concealment, and the realization was intoxicating. For the first time that evening, I felt a measure of peace, a delicate, trembling peace, because I knew that whatever happened after this night, whatever judgments, questions, or challenges lay ahead, a part of me had been awakened that could not be unawakened. The bet had been lost, yes, but in losing, I had found something far more precious, a doorway into the self I had never dared to meet. The house had grown quiet in ways I hadn't expected. The laughter and chatter of my friends had faded to a low murmur, leaving me with a soft hum of Christmas lights, the smell of pine needles, and the faint scent of cocoa lingering in the air. Standing near the tree, I traced my fingers along the branches absent-mindedly, letting the glittering ornaments brush against my hands. The dress felt heavier now, not just physically but emotionally, every fold and contour reminding me of the newness of this self I was inhabiting. Each movement was a negotiation between the person I had been, the person I appeared to be, and the person I was beginning to understand I could become. I caught my reflection in the glass of the window. The world outside was muted, snow drifting lazily across the street, lights from neighbors' houses twinkling like distant stars. But it was the reflection inside, the curve of my shoulders, the delicate taper of my wrists, the subtle sway of my hips in that dress, that held me captive. I had thought this would be temporary, a joke to satisfy a lost bet, something I could shed as easily as the clothes themselves. But now, in the quiet, I realized the truth. I could not unsee what I had discovered. This self, fragile and trembling though she was no longer just a reflection or a costume. She was real, tangible, present. I took a step back and felt the familiar instability of the heels, the way they forced me to carry myself differently, to inhabit space in ways that were unfamiliar, yet oddly commanding. Every click against the floor was a reminder that I could not retreat, that I had already ventured further than I had ever allowed myself. My heart pounded, not with fear but with anticipation, a low, steady rhythm that seemed to echo through my chest. I realized then that this was the point of no return, not the bet, not the dress, but the internal recognition that part of me had shifted irrevocably. The tension inside me was like a living thing, twisting and coiling, pulling me toward both exhilaration and terror. My hands trembled slightly as I brushed a strand of hair from my face, tracing the line of my jaw, feeling the strange weight and texture of my extensions. I had never been this aware of my own presence, this conscious of the subtle signals my body was sending. Every curve, every gesture, every sway of my hips was magnified in my mind, dissected, analyzed, and simultaneously celebrated. I was learning, painfully and beautifully, what it meant to inhabit a new identity, to walk through the world in a body that felt both mine and entirely new. And then came the first real test beyond mirrors and quiet observation: attention. One of my friends approached, eyes wide with something between surprise and admiration. "You look different," they said softly, almost reverently. It wasn't teasing, not exactly, it was acknowledgement, recognition. The way their gaze lingered on me made my stomach tighten, my pulse spike. I wanted to shrink away, to hide behind humor or excuses, but a small, stubborn part of me refused. I straightened my back, lifted my chin, and allowed myself to be seen fully, without apology. The sensation was both exhilarating and terrifying. Words faltered in my throat as I tried to respond. My voice felt foreign, softer than usual, carrying a timbre I wasn't accustomed to hearing, and yet when I spoke, it resonated in a way that felt honest, unfiltered, undeniably mine. I realized then that this was what I had been avoiding all along. Not the dress, not the bet, not the attention, but the act of existing openly, of letting this new self be recognized, acknowledged, and accepted, even tentatively, by others and, more importantly, by myself. I moved through the room carefully, each step in the heels deliberate, each gesture measured, and yet with each movement, a quiet confidence began to bloom. The dress shifted naturally, velvet brushing against skin, swaying in rhythm with my steps, and I felt a thrill that was almost electric. I was aware of every heartbeat, every breath, every subtle adjustment of posture, and the realization struck me that courage could take strange, unexpected forms. It could manifest in a high-pitched laugh, a fluttering glance, a hesitant step in unfamiliar shoes. It could live in the simple act of existing, fully and unapologetically, in a space that had previously felt impossible to claim. The quiet was punctuated by the soft rustle of fabric as I sank onto the couch again, this time with purpose rather than hesitation. I let the dress fall where it would, let the heels press against the floor with gentle authority, and allowed myself to simply exist in a room, surrounded by friends, by lights, by the hum of the holiday. The anxiety that had plagued me earlier, the panic, the fear of judgment, The uncertainty of identity was still there, but it had softened, transformed into something more complex: awareness, curiosity, and a growing sense of self-possession. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future where this self could exist beyond the confines of a bet, beyond the temporary confines of a dress, beyond the amusement of friends. I could feel the edges of possibilities stretching outward, uncertain and tantalizing, and I realized that the fear of being seen was inseparable from the thrill of being truly recognized. Every glance, every gesture, every heartbeat carried with it the potential for revelation, for understanding, for the slow, deliberate construction of an identity that was both mine and yet had been hidden from me for far too long. Time seemed to blur as I lingered in that state of tension and exhilaration. I noticed the faintest details, the shimmer of the lights across the velvet, the way my reflection caught in the window pane, the subtle tilt of my head as I observed myself, fully present. I felt both fragile and indestructible, exposed yet alive, aware of the contradictions within me and the strange, intoxicating clarity that came from embracing them. The dress was no longer just a garment. It was a vessel, a conduit through which I glimpsed the self I had been afraid to confront, and it demanded acknowledgement, respect, and care. And in that moment, standing at the precipice between fear and exhilaration, between concealment and revelation, I understood something fundamental. Identity was not fixed, not limited by habit, expectation, or societal norms. It was living, breathing, evolving, and I had been given a rare, improbable gift, a chance to meet a version of myself I had never dared to imagine, to inhabit her fully, and to see that she was real, undeniable, and deserving of recognition. The bet had been lost, yes, but what I had discovered in its wake was far greater than humiliation or amusement. I had discovered a doorway into myself, fragile yet persistent, terrifying yet exhilarating, and I knew, with a certainty that was both humbling and intoxicating, that I could never fully turn back. The self I had uncovered in the shimmer of velvet, in the sway of my hips, in the quiet acknowledgement of my friends, had been waiting all along, and she would follow me far beyond this night, far beyond the laughter, far beyond the temporary trappings of a game. She was real, and I was finally ready to meet her. The night had deepened, the warm glow of the Christmas lights stretching shadows across the walls, and yet the room felt alive in a way that made my chest thrum with anticipation and quiet reverence. Every movement, every breath, every heartbeat seemed magnified, as if the world had slowed to witness the subtle metamorphosis unfolding within me. I could feel the fabric of the dress resting against my skin, velvet soft and insistent, tracing every curve, every subtle movement, reminding me constantly that I was no longer just a spectator in my own life. I was the subject, the story, and the storyteller all at once. My friends' laughter had subsided into gentle murmurs of conversation, but I could feel their eyes on me, the unspoken acknowledgement that something extraordinary was happening. One of them leaned closer, voice low and tentative. "You're different," they said, and there was no teasing in the word, no irony, only recognition. My stomach twisted, part anxiety, part thrill, and I realized that recognition, real, unguarded, attentive recognition, was something I had never allowed myself to crave, and yet now, feeling it, it coursed through me like a quiet, powerful current. I took a deep breath, letting the sensation wash over me, and for the first time, I allowed myself to truly own the reflection in the window pane. The hair cascading over my shoulders, the heels that forced me to inhabit space in a new way, the velvet clinging to every contour of my body, it was all me. Not a costume, not a joke, not a temporary disguise, but an expression, a presence, a truth I had been too afraid to acknowledge. Every small movement felt deliberate, powerful, even sacred. My fingers traced the folds of the dress almost absent-mindedly, and I realized that in doing so, I was touching more than fabric. I was touching the edges of who I could be, who I had been all along beneath the surface. The tension inside me, which had wavered between fear and exhilaration, began to settle into something more profound, acceptance. Not passive acceptance, but active recognition, a willingness to allow this self to exist fully, without apology or concealment. I realized that the anxiety I had carried, the fear of judgment or ridicule, had always been intertwined with my desire to explore this side of myself. And now, standing in front of friends, in a space I had once considered safe but limiting, I understood that I could inhabit this identity without shame, without hesitation, without the need to shrink back into comfort. I moved closer to the tree, letting the ornaments brush against my fingertips, watching the reflections ripple across the velvet of the dress. Every sway, every tilt of my hips, every adjustment of my posture felt intentional, expressive, a statement without words. I felt a thrill that was both terrifying and liberating, a recognition that the boundaries I had imagined for myself were far more flexible than I had ever allowed. I was discovering that courage didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered, subtle and insistent, in the way I held myself, in the way I allowed myself to be seen, in the quiet acknowledgement that I could exist in this form without apology. One friend reached out, gently touching my arm, and the contact was electric, grounding. "You're incredible," they murmured, and their words struck something deep inside me. I wanted to laugh nervously, to deflect, to claim it was only the dress, only the bet, but the truth was undeniable. I had grown into this moment, grown into this self, and no teasing, no jest, no temporary circumstance could erase what had awakened. My heart pounded, and I realized that vulnerability and strength could coexist in a way I had never imagined, that exposing myself fully, allowing myself to be recognized, was not weakness but power. I sank into the couch once more, velvet pressing against my thighs, heels planted firmly, and I let myself breathe fully, deeply, without constraint. The anxiety that had haunted me earlier, the fear of judgment, the uncertainty of identity, had not vanished entirely, but it had transformed. It was no longer a chain, but a gentle reminder of how far I had come, how much courage it took to inhabit this self fully, and how exhilarating it could be to exist beyond the limitations I had imposed on myself. Time seemed to stretch and contract, each moment elongated with intensity, each sensation magnified. I noticed the smallest details, the shimmer of the lights on the velvet, the way my hair fell across my collarbone, the quiet rhythm of my own breath. And in noticing, I began to forgive myself. I forgave the years of hesitation, the self-doubt, the fear of judgment. I forgave the parts of me that had hidden, that had questioned, that had refused to explore what lay beneath. And in that forgiveness, I felt a strange, unshakable peace, a knowledge that this self, delicate and resilient, terrified and exhilarated, was valid, real, and deserving of existence. The climax of this realization came quietly, in a moment that felt almost sacred. I stood, heels clicking softly, hands resting lightly on my hips, hair cascading in gentle waves, and I allowed myself to smile, fully, genuinely, without restraint. The reflection in the window, the soft glow of the Christmas lights, the quiet acknowledgement of friends who had been witnesses to this transformation, it all converged, and I understood that I had crossed a threshold. I was no longer merely experimenting, no longer playing a role, no longer defined by a bet. I had discovered a version of myself that could exist openly, courageously, and beautifully. And in that quiet, luminous moment, I understood something profound. The bet, the laughter, the costume, they had been catalysts, but they were not the destination. The destination was here, now, in the full recognition of who I was becoming, in the acceptance of my own reflection, in the acknowledgement that identity is not fixed but alive, mutable, and capable of growth. I had stepped into a new world, one defined not by fear or conformity, but by courage, curiosity, and the willingness to embrace the unknown. I exhaled, slow and deliberate, letting the thrill of revelation settle into my bones. My fingers brushed the soft velvet once more, and I realized that I had not merely worn the dress. I had inhabited it, transformed through it, and emerged with a self I had never dared to meet. And though the night would eventually end, the laughter would fade, and the lights would dim, this self, fragile, daring, beautiful, and entirely mine, would endure, a quiet, unshakable presence in every step I took, every reflection I encountered, every choice I made. The house had quieted completely now. The laughter, the teasing, the clinking of mugs and rustle of wrapping paper, it had all faded into a soft hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls, the furniture, the very air around me. Outside, the snow had thickened, falling in slow, silent flurries that blanketed the street, and for the first time that evening, I felt truly alone with myself, yet not lonely. I was standing in the center of the living room, heels planted firmly, dress swaying gently with each small movement, hair cascading over my shoulders, and it struck me, fully, irrevocably, that I had arrived somewhere I could never have predicted. I had crossed the threshold from fear into understanding, from hesitation into acceptance, and from tentative curiosity into a profound awareness of who I was becoming. The mirror across the room caught my reflection, fragmented by light and shadow, and I took a deliberate step toward it. Every detail seemed sharper than ever. The delicate taper of my wrists, the curve of my shoulders, the subtle sway of my hips in the velvet dress. I studied the lines of my face, the shape of my eyes framed by long lashes, the soft arch of my lips, and I recognized myself fully. Not the person I had been yesterday, not the frightened version who had trembled at the idea of being seen, but someone new, someone whole, someone unapologetically herself. And yet, this self was not distant or invented. It was mine, waiting all along beneath the layers of fear and doubt, waiting for the courage to step forward. I moved closer, heels clicking softly against the floor, and felt the subtle power in each step, the way my body demanded to be acknowledged, to exist without apology. I let my hands brush the folds of the dress gently, letting the fabric remind me of everything I had experienced that night, the humiliation, the nervous laughter, the tentative first steps, the quiet moments of wonder, the exhilarating thrill of being recognized and accepted. It was all there, woven into the texture of the velvet, into the sway of the skirt, into the way my reflection now smiled back at me without hesitation. There was a moment, a single heartbeat stretched across eternity, when I realized that the bet, the laughter, the initial embarrassment had all been irrelevant. They had been catalysts, sparks that had ignited something far greater. What mattered was the transformation that had taken place within me, the quiet, unstoppable revelation that identity is not static, not constrained by expectation or fear, but alive, fluid, and profoundly personal. I had met myself tonight, truly met her, and she had been waiting, patient and persistent, through every year, every hesitation, every doubt. I sank onto the couch finally, letting the dress fall where it would, heels pressing against the floor, hair brushing my shoulders, and allowed myself to exhale fully. The anxiety that had haunted me for hours, nervousness, self-consciousness, fear of judgment, had not disappeared entirely, but it had softened into something constructive, something alive. It was the quiet pulse of awareness, the gentle hum of understanding, the reminder that I had survived, I had explored, and I had emerged stronger, more fully present, more wholly myself. My friends, sensing the shift in the room, gave quiet, approving smiles. There was no teasing now, no laughter at my expense, only acknowledgement and, in their eyes, a reflection of the acceptance I was beginning to give myself. I realized then that the true transformation was not just in the dress or the heels or the hair. It was in the quiet, intimate recognition of my own worth, the ability to inhabit my presence fully, and the understanding that I did not need external permission to exist as I wished. This self was valid. This self was real. This self belonged. The night stretched onward, silent but full of meaning. I ran my fingers along the soft velvet once more, feeling the familiar contours, and smiled gently at the person I saw in the reflection, a stranger who was now intimate, a self that was no longer tentative, a person ready to meet the world with courage and authenticity. There was a dizzying sense of freedom in that moment, a release of tension that I hadn't known I had carried so heavily for years. Every step I had taken, every hesitant movement, every tremor of uncertainty had led me here, and I could finally appreciate the quiet majesty of it all. I stood, shifting my weight from heel to heel, testing the balance that had seemed impossible at first, and I realized that the act of inhabiting this form had changed more than my appearance. It had shifted my perception, expanded the boundaries of who I could be, and rewritten the narrative I had told myself for so long. I was no longer afraid of observation, no longer constrained by judgment, no longer hiding behind humor or distraction. I could be seen fully, without shame, and the realization was liberating beyond words. The reflection in the window, the soft glow of Christmas lights, the quiet awareness of my friends, and the deep, steady rhythm of my own heartbeat converged into a singular truth. I had stepped into a new chapter, one defined by courage, curiosity, and acceptance. I had discovered a self that was beautiful, fragile, resilient, and enduring. A self I could honor, nurture, and carry forward into every moment of life. And in that profound stillness, I whispered to myself, softly, irrevocably, with trembling certainty, this is me. Not a costume. Not a bet lost. Not a fleeting performance. This is me. And for the first time, I believed it fully. The snow outside continued to fall, soft and persistent, blanketing the world in quiet wonder. I let the realization sink in. The world could see me now, yes, but more importantly, I could see myself. And that was everything. The room, the lights, the laughter, the dress, the heels, the hair. All of it faded into a background hum as I stood there, grounded, present, and fully alive. The bet had been lost, but what I had found was far greater than victory or defeat. I had found myself. And I knew, with an unwavering certainty that carried me forward beyond that night, that this self, fragile, daring, beautiful, whole, would accompany me through every tomorrow, every reflection, every step into the unknown, as mine, entirely and unconditionally mine. The journey had begun, and I was ready.